As the fighting continues to escalate between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Israeli military is in the midst of planning a response to Iran's attack on the country, which we saw on Tuesday night. That was an absolute insane display of rocket fire. 200 ballistic missiles fired into Israeli territory. Citizens could see this in skies across the state of Israel. The IDF is warning that the response is going to be serious and significant. And according to a report out of the New York Times, a growing number of Iranians are now expressing anxiety over the potential war that could ensue, saying that the Islamic Republic has not built proper defensive measures to protect the public, like basic bomb shelters. Well, joining us now is contributing writer at The Atlantic, Arash Azizi. So first of all, give us a sense of where the Iranian public stands when it comes to this war. There are many who say they don't want a war with Israel. They don't support the Islamic Republic of Iran. On the other hand, could we expect most Iranians to rally around the Iranian flag if a larger war does break out with Israel attacking Iran proper?
I think most Iranians definitely don't want a war with Israel. Our society does not really have an animus toward Israel, generally speaking. You don't find the sort of classical anti-Israel feelings that exist in many Arab countries in Iran, and they don't want to get their country into the war. So I think most of the population is really exhausted by the regime's repression, but also very worried about the possibility of war. And if I'm honest with you, I think this is very short-sighted, but there is a minority of the population who actually looks favorably of the possibility of Israeli strikes because they see it as sort of a weakening of the Islamic Republic. Again, I personally don't share that view, and I think it's a short-sighted view. But there are those who think that. But unfortunately, as I said, Iranian economy has really been weakened in recent years. People have been really repressed by their own regime. So now the possibility of a war, of their regime getting themselves into a war with the country, which we don't have any natural disputes. We don't have a border with Israel. We don't have any reason, as Iran as a country has no reason to be fighting Israel. And so I think a lot of people are really angry at the regime for putting them at the risk of this war that won't be good news.
What kind of attack do you think that Iran is expecting at this point, and what impact would that have on the country? Obviously, you mentioned the very severe economic crisis that locals are facing on the ground.
We all know, and Iranians who discuss these things know that there are three levels of attack sort of possible. There's a possibility of Israel attacking the military sites and nuclear sites. And then there's the possibility of infrastructure, i.e. refineries, sites like that could have a really severe effect on Iran. It could push Iran back basically for a decade at least, if not more. And the third is sort of a political, the possibility that they actually want to go and, assassinate and kill sort of ranking sort of leaders, military leaders or such sorts. I don't think that the third one, I think we all believe that that's sort of has the least possibility. But I think a lot of Iranians that I've spoken to hope at least that it won't be that even if Israel does attack, it won't be an attack on infrastructure, which, as I said, will push Iran back and push our people back, our economy back for a very long time. But yeah, so these are some of the expectations. And what kind of attack Israel does will also determine what kind of response it gets from the Iranian people, from different political forces. You asked me earlier about the rally around the flag. It's an interesting question. I think we've already seen a bit of a regime factions, i.e. different regime factions. I would say something like, very broadly defined, maybe 15 to 20% of the Iranian society. 10%, 15% of them are maybe hardcore regime supporters. The others are not necessarily regime supporters, but they're regime critics. They're not really opposed to the regime as a whole. Yes, amongst them, we've seen a bit of a rally around the flag, but that they want to defend their country against the foreign attack. But even amongst them, there is an anger and there's a belief. There are pragmatic elements, even inside the Iran regime, even inside the Iran establishment. I believe Iran has no business fighting Israel. This is,
Right.
this is not what was supposed to happen, and it's not what should happen. And you mentioned the shelters. Yes, there is a severe problem. When I was born in 1988, my mother, as a pregnant woman, had been in shelters hiding from Saddam Hussein's missiles, and this is the first time ever since then, almost 40 years later, where there's a possibility that we missiles in our cities. I don't think, unfortunately, the regime has prepared defenses enough for this situation.
Right. Well, Iran has vowed an even more crushing response if Israel chooses to strike back against that ballistic missile attack that we saw on Tuesday. In your opinion, how much worse could that look, that kind of response actually look, given what we saw the Islamic Republic do on October 1st? Certainly, almost 200 ballistic missiles launched at all parts of the country is no small feat. And at this point, what kind of arsenal does the Islamic Republic have?
They have at least a few hundred more missiles of the same level, and there's a problem that they cannot produce them fast enough if they actually want to attack Israel. But I mean, it could be worse. They could try to actually attack Israeli infrastructure. The kind of threats that they've made, they're putting sort of maps around, talking about what are some of the sites they could hit. This is the oil terminals, the refineries, from Ashkelon to Haifa to different parts of Israel. And what the military leaders of Iran are saying is that, Israel is a small country and it's reliant on a few different sites, so they could try to attack them. And I think the Israeli air defense is pretty good. Obviously, the Arrows system, in addition to David's Sling and Iron Dome, and they could stop a lot of them. But I think it's clear that if Iran really puts a lot of pressure there, they can't defend all of them. But the more important deterrent is that, of course, if Iran does something like that degrades Israeli capabilities, like, attacks refineries and things like that, then it could expect a much harsher attack on Iranian soil. And that should be the main deterrent. I want to be clear that I think the Iranian regime does not really want war. Now, of course, they have terrible anti-Israel and anti-Semitic views, and that's clear. But also, I don't think Ayatollah Khamenei wants war. I think he has always been afraid of a direct confrontation with Israel. I don't think he wants it now, and I think he will try to do what he can to avoid it while he's alive, and he's 85, so that's not very long. But they are, in terms of the threats that they're making, they've said very clearly which sites in Israel they want to attack if Iran gets hit. And some of there's a lot of the different proponents of different sides are doing all sorts of loud talk that's, you can't differentiate gibberish from the serious sport sometimes.